We really have a nice turnout tonight. And very happy to see everyone. We have two more speakers this season. Next month is a gentleman that's a volunteer park ranger, and he is going to talk about all the beautiful trails along the Channel Coast. And then the one you really don't want to miss is in November, and that's when we have a gentleman who lives here in Ventura, and he's going to talk on the climate challenge. And I'll tell you a little bit now about the speaker we have tonight, who many of us know because he's pretty well known for Ghostbuster, I think it's called, but that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about the entertainment industry and the things that went on in the very early days here, very close to us, at what is now Hollywood Beach. And Richard Sennett comes from a family of people in the entertainment industry. His father, his grandfather, aunts and uncles, his whole life was around the industry from, he said 1926. He is a historian, and he has written 24 books published to date. He has always been interested in the unique history of the film and the silent years of Hollywood, which we'll hear something about tonight. And so, and we'll also hear about the iconic figure Valentino. So here now is Richard Sennett.
There's a good book out called The History of the Channel Islands. You may have seen it. I think they have it for sale here. And if you read it, it says it all started with Rudolph Valentino. Well, that's not really true. It didn't start there. Where did it start, though? It started in California in 1874 with a guy by the name of Leland Stanford, who was a governor and a senator from our state. And he made a bet with a fellow. The bet was, when a horse is galloping, does all 4 feet go off the ground? It's quite a debate. Many people say that couldn't happen, the horse would fall over. It couldn't be. So he made a bet, and he hired an Englishman named Edward Muybridge to actually prove it. What did he do? He owned racehorses, so he set up 24 cameras. And they put a thread across the racetrack, and they hooked the thread to the shutter of the camera. Now, before 1874, there was no shutters on cameras. Did you know that? There was no shutter. How did they take pictures? They take the lens cap off and say, Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. Then they put the lens cap on. And that's how they took pictures. Muybridge invented the shutter. And he took the pictures, a horse galloped through, 24 pictures were taken, and it proved conclusively that the horse did have its feet all off the ground. But they also found, when they looked at the pictures quickly, the horse appeared to move. But remember, all the photography was on pieces of glass. So you couldn't really project it. They put it on a big wheel, and they would spin it with a projector, and the horse would appear to run. And they took other pictures of people walking, birds flying. But it wasn't until Eastman Kodak developed celluloid film back in 1890 that they were able to make a camera that would actually use celluloid film to take pictures, moving pictures. In fact, the French were the first ones to monopolize on this. The Lumiere brothers made a number of films and projected them in 1895. Now, it became kind of a little trick thing that everyone wanted to see. And there was a magician in France named Georges Méliès. He got one of the cameras. And he was taking pictures because there were no stories, nothing. They were just pictures of street scenes. And he didn't know how to operate the camera well. So he sets up his camera, and there is a bus coming towards or passing him. But unfortunately, his camera jammed. So he's there fussing with it, and finally, after a few minutes, got it to work again, started cranking, and a hearse drove by. When he developed the film, he was amazed to find a bus going into the shot, and then it magically transformed into a hearse. He thought that was really great, so he started using his magic tricks to make movies. And he made all sorts of films about haunted houses and angels, you know, built his own studio even. Wow. He made his classic film in 1902, The Trip to the Moon. And that became very, very popular. In fact, you can still get it online if you want. Very staid, there's no close-up, there's just a camera bolted down watching the action on screen. Well, his films became very popular. And who was a place that really wanted them? America. And we opened Nickelodeons and all kinds of things. But you know what the Americans would do? They'd go and buy one of his movies, and then they'd make copies of it and not pay him. It was being pirated.
Sounds like us.
Finally, he got so mad that he sent his brother Gaston to the United States to stop it. And he came out and he did it. Now, one of the things the French did then, I guess it's still true today, they loved Westerns, like Western films. So he said to Gaston, while you're in America, go to the Southwest and make Westerns. We can sell them in Europe and all over the world. Well, he did. He went to Texas and he made a movie called The Alamo, which was a strange, weird version of what really happened at the Alamo. And then it started to rain too bad, so what did he do? He came west. And he ended up in Santa Paula. In Santa Paula, there was no Hollywood yet. So Santa Paula, in 1909, he started making films there. Films like the Ghost of Sulphur Mountain, The Mission Waif, all these films. Now, all these little quickie films they made in Santa Paula, you know how many survived? One. Only one is left. Then 1912, 1913, he left Santa Paula, got on a big steamship, and started making films in the South Seas. He'd pull into an island, recruit some natives, make a quickie story, and then it would be distributed. Oddly enough, his movies about the South Seas give a full documentation of a way of life that no longer exists. And so it did great work, even though, of course, he was just making little commercial films. Unfortunately for Gaston, he tried eating some shellfish in Madagascar and got a stomach ulcer and killed him. So he didn't make any more films after that. But that's what started it out. Also, Edison had made movies and others. They tried to stop movie making so they could collect royalties. So all the independent filmmakers, rather than pay the tax, what did they do? They came to California. Why? The weather. Also, it was close to Mexico. So they could cross the border if the law was after them. So one of the people was an actor named Cecil B. DeMille. He had started a movie called The Escape from an Eagle's Nest earlier. He and some investors came forward, a guy named Jesse Lasky. They put him on a train and they sent him out to make a movie in the West. So we're going to go to Tucson. And the movie was based on a popular novel and stage play called The Squaw Man. So he got to Tucson, it was raining. So he stayed on the train. And where did the train end up? LA. He got off the train and he said, well, I need to someplace to make a movie. And there was a farmer there that said, hey, I'll rent you half my barn. Not the whole barn, just half. He still had animals in the other half. So he rented the barn, and that barn was in a little town called Hollywood. And they made the Squaw Man there. Later, it was very successful. He remade the movie 3 times, and later bought the barn, and that became the nucleus of Paramount Studios. And if you go, oh, by the way, they use that barn in all of their movies, including the last time it was used was on Bonanza. So they just keep using things over and over again. Hollywood is about saving money. They can do it. Well, they came in and the big studio system finally emerged in Hollywood. There were 9 main studios operating. They literally gobbled up all the other little studios. And into this scene, this is about 1920, a lot of things really happened. And there was a terrible catastrophe that hit the United States in 1918. And people forget about it, but we shouldn't. It was a great flu epidemic that hit the country. In 1 month, the month of October, 1918, 450,000 Americans died. Worldwide, 60 million died. That's almost as many as died in the Second World War. In World War I, only 11 million people died, but the flu killed all these others. It was called the Spanish flu. And you know the bad thing about it? It'd kill you in 3 days. And who did it get? The healthy people, people who are young. Usually a flu gets the children and the elderly. For some strange reason, the elderly weren't affected. Neither were the children. But the strong people were wiped out. It hit like a sledgehammer. Schools were closed and turned into flu hospitals. Nobody went to the movies anymore. Why? It was airborne. And anytime someone coughed at you, you could get sick. And by the way, they had masks they put on, which were completely worthless, because it was like, someone said, trying to keep out mosquitoes with chicken wire. They weren't thick enough. By the way, who was the worst spreaders of the illness? Mailmen. They come to your door. This is a long time ago. They'd knock on the door. And you'd answer, here's your mail. Here's some flu. And it spread all over the place. Literally, 1 out of every 10 people of Ventura County caught the flu. And a large percentage, over 20%, died. It was all the studios closed up. Everything ended. And it looked like almost the end of the world for many people. But fortunately, though they tried all they could, the flu finally stopped. And there was a big resurgence. Once the flu had mutated to a less virulent form, the studios were back in business. And who was the king of Hollywood at that time? The daring and dashing Doug Fairbanks. Doug Fairbanks was this romantic character who jumped and hopped around a lot. He was really great at comedy. Comedy was his forte. And what kind of movies did he like to make? Little movies which had lots of sexual innuendos in them. Of course, that wasn't allowed to stand for too long. He later became known as a swashbuckler. That's what he reorganized his career at. He decided to make a movie. He had gone to Europe during the flu epidemic after World War I, and he went to England and picked up the story of Robin Hood. So he came back and said, I'm going to make Robin Hood. Well, where should he film it? Well, here in Ventura County was a little lake called Lake Puegas, which means fleas, flea lake. And he renamed it Lake Sherwood. And built a castle there, and in the oak trees of Lake Sherwood, subbing for Sherwood Forest, he made Robin Hood. And it was a really classic film. But he had a problem. He was married to America's sweetheart, which was Mary Pickford. Now, at the end of the scene, at one part of the movie, Robin Hood thinks that Maid Marian, his love, has been killed by the evil King John. And later he discovers that she's just hiding in a nunnery. And he discovers her, and she comes back, and he gives her a big kiss. Mary Pickford would not allow the actress to kiss her husband. She insisted for that scene, she took the place of the actress. But she was a little short person, so I had to put her on a box. And everyone knew the story, and he ran up to her and gave her a big long smooch. And of course, everyone in the audience loved Mary Pickford, and they loved Douglas Fairbanks. It was quite a hit. He went to New York. That's what you did. You went to New York to push your film. In fact, in one of the shots in New York, the reporters were interviewing him, and he had a bow and arrow in his hand. And being Doug Fairbanks, he pulled the bow back and shot the arrow out the window. He didn't know the arrow flew out the window. There was a building across the way, and a gentleman had opened the window. He was leaning over. The arrow flew in and hit him in the butt. And he was completely surprised. What is it going He was going to sue Doug Fairbanks, right? So you know what Doug Fairbanks did? By the way, it's a good way to handle problems like this. He came over to the hospital where the man was recuperating with a suitcase full of money, cash, and said, "Oh, if you'll just sign this release, here's 2 tickets to my movie, and my signature, and a big suitcase of money." So he settled out of court. And I guess he was pleased with that. So Doug Fairbanks actually helped to put Sherwood Forest on the map. But Doug Fairbanks also made another movie right here at Hollywood by the beach called Bound for Morocco. And what is the story of Bound for Morocco? Well, most of it was shot in the back of the studio. And only the outside scenes were shot in this area. Why? 2 reasons. A, it's close to Hollywood. B, it's sand dunes, right? And C, it was cheap. And that's what Hollywood's all about. So they came here, he filmed the movie. It's essentially about an American character who discovers an American woman is being held in a harem. And so he goes in, beats up all the bad guys, gets a girl, and they escape by horse, in cars, and eventually they manage to get away in a speedboat. So it's a romantic comedy. That was the first movie shot at Hollywood by the Sea. Now, into this whole equation comes a most remarkable man. A man who you might say is the essence of early Hollywood. That was an Italian dancer named Rudolph Valentino. Now, he was kind of got away from his family in Italy. They wanted to become a farmer. By the way, he had a college degree. Did you know that? In agriculture. He went to Paris and was a dancer and had relationships. Finally, he left Europe just before World War I and went to New York, where he couldn't find a job. For a while, he was a groundskeeper at Central Park. But what could he do? Dance. So he got a job working in an establishment that had dancing. So back then, if you were a wealthy woman, you would go to such places, there was music, and handsome men who would dance with you. Well, he got caught up in a love triangle between himself and this very wealthy man and his wife. Well, unfortunately, she came home one day, got a gun, and shot her husband. And so, hearing about this, Valentino realized, oop, I better get out of town fast. So he took a job with a movie company, a play, so not a movie, it was a play. They were supposed to go to San Francisco. And he thought, well, there's a lot of farming out there, I can go out there. Well, the show busted at Salt Lake City. But he managed to get enough money scraped together for a ticket to San Francisco. Got there, no business. He met a guy and he said, hey, you want to really make some money? Go to Hollywood. So he managed to get fare down to Hollywood, where immediately he became part of the casting menagerie down there. They liked his dark, swarthy figures. Back in those days, dark, swarthy people were always the bad guys. You had to be able to tell good from bad, you see, because it's a silent play. So he got a lot of roles as the bad guy. And finally he met a lady named June Mathis, who was not very pretty, but she was a script writer. Interesting thing about Hollywood, the early years, women had a bigger role than we like to think. A lot of them wrote plays, wrote scenarios, and actually even some directing. So it wasn't as closed in as it would be in later years. So it was very open. She said, that's the guy to play the part in this new movie. See, World War I happened. World War I was a hideous, horrible bloodbath. Did you know that? Poison gas, shell bomb. Everybody after World War I was disgusted with war. They hated it. They said, okay, after this, no more of this war junk. We're not going to go over and save Europe's bacon anymore. It's too costly. And so a guy wrote a book called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And it is an anti-war book. Talks about how horrible the war is, which it is true. And it takes place, oddly enough, in Argentina. And there were two families, one French, one German, living in Argentina. They're called back to their home countries and immediately involved in the war. And finally, at the very end, they meet on the battlefield and one kills the other. So it's a very sad story. But they needed someone to play the romantic lead of Julio. And he had to be able to dance a steamy tango. So Valentino was like perfect for it. And he steals the movie from his little dance scenes were just really perfect. One of the reasons he actually did very well is he didn't overact. A lot of the silent actors had to over gesticulate. He never did. In fact, his acting style is far more modern in our way of thinking. His is very low-key, and a lot of people liked him for that. Well, Valentino became famous for The Four Horsemen, but he had one bad quality. He picked lousy women to marry. The first one was Jean Acker, whom they had a great relationship. She even gave him a slave bracelet, which he wore for the rest of his life. But after they got married, she locked him out of the bedroom and never slept with him at all, period. Some say she was gay or something like that. We don't know what the story is. But she was a screwed up puppy. They later got a divorce. And he met another lady at a play who was a set designer, a costume designer, who took the name Natasha Rambova. Very classy Russian name. That was not her real name. Her real name was Winifred O'Shaughnessy. But she and he had this very long, romantic relationship. Finally, they got married, but there was only one minor problem. She liked being Mrs. Rudolph Valentino. She liked managing his career. She didn't really care for him all that much. And it made life very difficult. And whenever they made a movie, and he made a number after The Four Horsemen, she would impose herself. She was on the set. She was actually would direct her husband, push the director aside. Oh, do it this way. He said, oh, I don't like these costumes. Get rid of them. I'll design new costumes. She was a pill. Finally, the studios got so sick of her and sick of the fact that Valentino would do anything for her. They decided to punish her. How do you punish a movie star? Well, you sell them to a B picture. And Paramount was making this B picture. A lady named Hull had written a very sexy book called The Sheik. And they watered it down tremendously. You can read the original. It's pretty sexy, saucy for the era. And they were going to make this movie. That's a B picture. It's not even a good silent movie. But to punish Valentino, they put him in. And they told him his wife has no say-so. Well, they decided to film most of it at the Paramount lot. And actually it's a parking lot now, but where they shot it. But all of the desert scenes were shot at the beach in Oxnard. Now, they had an oasis, so they had like several 400 palm trees made out of paper mache and wire. And they made these and stuck them around a saltwater lagoon to make an oasis. Then they hired all the local cowboys to dress up in burnouses and play the Arab leaders. Well, everything went really well for the movie. By the way, Miss Rambova actually has a part in the movie. If you ever watch it, she's at the very beginning and actually has a couple of lines. They had a house for him to stay in, and he made this movie. Now, Valentino hated the Sheik. He didn't like that role at all, but he was perfect. Agnes Ayres was his foil. She later married well and got out of movies. She didn't do it. She came out of retirement to be in his second Sheik movie, The Son of the Sheik, which was his last film. Well, they're in the show. This is what it's about. It's about an headstrong English woman who goes out and goes to forbidden areas of Morocco. Then she goes off on her own, even though she's warned not to, and the Sheik, Valentino, steals her. Essentially grabs her, takes her to his tent, and she asks him, when they get to his encampment, "What do you want with me?" And what does he say? "Are you not woman enough to know?" Then he pulls her in the tent, and they close the curtain. And the next scene that they had, she comes out, she's now dressed in Arab attire. She's very submissive. Eventually, he falls in love with him, and he falls in love with her. Everything's happily ever after. But if you watch the movie carefully, you'll notice an interesting thing about Morocco. I've never been to Morocco, but I don't think it's probable that this exists. You see ice plant growing on the sand dune. There's actually one shot where you actually see the ocean from the sand dunes. And of course, they rode around. A lot of interesting things about the movie. For instance, Loretta Young, very popular. It was her first movie. She was a child. She played a little girl, one of the Sheik's people. There's a lot of famous people. Adolf Menchu is in it. And what really worked was Valentino's low-key acting and his stares at the camera. And his nostrils would flare. Women loved it. And they would go to the movie and see it over and over and over again. The whole country went Sheik crazy. In fact, in those days, if you were a young man, you would be called a Sheik. And of course, what would women be called? The object of their desires? Shebas. Which is another movie that was made right here in Oxnard by the Sea, The Queen of Sheba.
Oh, Sheba.
Queen of Sheba was another B picture. It was to star Theda Bara, who not only was a pretty good actress, but also she had a good figure and wore very little clothing. This has always been a great way to make a career. And she married a wealthy man, didn't need to do that anymore, and so she retired. But the studio had spent all this money developing the movie and making the sets that they found an English lady, Betty Blythe, to play her part, who also had a good figure and was not adverse to showing it off. And so she made this movie. Unfortunately, the movie, The Queen of Sheba, is lost. All we have left is 17 seconds of it. All we've got left. But there were stills taken during they still do this in Hollywood. When they make a movie that takes stills, we have some of the stills. They show her topless, all kinds of stuff, showing it all off. So I wish we had the film. Wouldn't it be great if we had it? She went on and made She, another English production of the H. Rider Haggard novel, a number of other films until she too retired, I suppose, with her Shrinking Beauty. But they made that film here. But just the escape through the desert scenes. Now, into this equation comes another fellow who happens to be a relative of mine. His name was Mac Sennett. Mac Sennett and my family both came from the town in Canada. So we are related in some fashion. I don't know exactly.
What town? What town? What town in Canada?
I forget the name of it. I'm sorry, I don't know the town. But it's in New Brunswick.
Oh, okay.
Anyhow, he came west and he made movies with some of the early Edison people like Porter. He got ideas for comedies. He went and said, I got this idea. How about a group of funny policemen? And they looked at him, and said, policemen? They're funny? Policemen aren't funny. And he later came out to California, started his own studio, and used the Keystone Cops. And became incredibly popular. Found a lot of stars, including Chaplin, Marion Davies, and others. And an interesting man named Ben Turpin. Ben Turpin is one of the comic geniuses. He was born in New Orleans, 1869. He was a carpenter. He fell off a ladder, hit his head, and he came out of it with crossed eyes. Couldn't see all that well, but they tried to uncross him. They couldn't. So he said, okay, got crossed eyes now. What am I going to do? Well, he went into comedy, into burlesque, and vaudeville, and even for a while served on a circus. And he grew a bushy mustache and actually managed to develop pratfalls real well. He actually worked with Charlie Chaplin for a brief time, but he didn't like Chaplin. Chaplin really was a hard-working comedian. He worked every joke out. Ben Turpin wasn't like that. It was just automatic with him. He didn't have to work to be funny. He was just naturally funny. And he went on and joined up with Mac Sennett in Hollywood, in Culver City actually, and he did great. And people loved him because now they could do the close-ups and get his funny-looking eyes. Now, one of the things Mac Sennett did do, first he focused on bathing beauties. Sexy women in little bathing attire. Does it sound common today? You want to make money, that's what you do. So, of course, the swimming suits started with just the ankles being exposed, and as time went on, they got smaller and smaller and smaller. And of course, his movies became more and more popular with it. But he also did something else, very interesting. Whenever there was a hit, a big movie that was made, popular, you know what he'd do? He'd make a spoof of it. A comedy version. Like there was a Western, The Virginia, with a handsome man leading it, you know. He made his own copy of The Virginia. And with who leading it? Ben Turpin. A cross-eyed fellow as a handsome lead. So they did that. Now, why did they do that? Okay, you're a theater owner. You run a popular film. You run it to death. Everyone's seen it. And then you have to change the bill, right? Mac Sennett would quickly, within 2 weeks, make a parody. 2 weeks. And then he would give that to you. So what you do is you get the old film that you've already run to death and then run right after it the spoof. And everyone wanted to see the spoof, right? Because it was funny. And it had inside jokes from the original film. You see, Mac Sennett would go down to the movies, buy a ticket and a notebook, and write jokes as he's watching the movie. And then they use them. Well, The Sheik was intensely popular. So what did Mac Sennett do? He made his own version, with starring in the Valentino role, Ben Turpin. Now, if you watch the movie, it's called The Shriek of Araby. And it's about a movie theater worker who falls asleep and dreams himself in the movie. That's what it's about. And there's all kinds of funny stuff in it. But if you don't know the original movie, you don't get a lot of the. You have to watch both of them. One of the funniest sequences is a lion sequence where Ben Turpin encounters an African lion. What they did is they had him with the lion, probably one of Louis Goebbels' lions or something like that, And then they did the long shots, and all they were was a dog dressed up in a lion costume. And it looks like a dog in a lion, but it's a comedy. So who cares, right? They're running around. Finally, he manages to jump onto an ostrich and manages to escape on an ostrich. He did all these variety of different things, but it was another big hit right after that. Now, of course, now Hollywood by the Sea is becoming more and more popular. Now, they made a number of other small films there, including Omar the Tent Maker. Never heard of it, right? It still exists. Now, who did it have in it besides a cast of people you've never heard of? Boris Karloff played the Heppy. He was in silent films before he did Frankenstein. And they made a few of those. There's also, and this is debatable, there is believed to be one shot taken at Hollywood by the Beach for the film The Crowd. King Vidor was the director of this movie about New York. And it's a really awful, realistic, depressing movie about a guy who loses everything, gets married, he has children, and finally he loses his job and he's going to kill himself. But in the early part of the films where he's optimistic, he goes to Coney Island and romances this girl who marries him foolishly and has a horrible life as well. But it's very realistic, very artistically shot. It's really a pretty good movie. It won Best Director in the very first Academy Awards. Well, guess what? They got the stuff back from New York all right. Some of the scenes were screwed up. Problem was trying to shoot at Coney Island were really rough, because wherever they'd start shooting, all the people would go there and watch, get in the picture, all that. So they had to reshoot the beach scene. It's supposed to be Coney Island. It's really Oxnard. So they got the actors, drove them up here, shot the pictures, and that little insert, we believe, we're not certain, was in fact a shot there. Well, what happened with Valentino? He's now the world's first superstar. He is incredibly rich, but he's still saddled with that wife who is in there making more and more demands. Finally, he signed up to make a movie in New York. The studio said, we'll hire you. We want you to be in this movie, The Cobra. And there's another movie he did called The Eagle, which is kind of a Russian Zorro kind of film. Strange movie in itself. But they said, his wife was not allowed on the lot. She threw a fit. And what did she do? She left. She just took off, went to Europe. He never saw her again. She filed for a divorce, even though he tried to reconcile with her. He even went to Europe to try to talk to her. And we saved their marriage. It didn't work. And so he went on, like I guess it's pretty normal, a kind of a, I don't know, spree. He started to date anything in a skirt. And he just had all kinds of different girlfriends, a short order form. Well, by the way, he even had some interesting tips for how to make love to women. You might want to try one of these. He would go to his intendant's house with a big 24 roses. Meet them at the door. He made sure that when he came over, there was nobody else there. Then she would say, oh, you got me all these fine roses. He'd push her aside and go past her into the bedroom, right? Then he would tear the roses apart and throw all the petals onto the bed. Till the whole bed is covered with rose petals. Put the stems down, you know. Then he would take off her clothes and throw her on the bed with the rose petals. Then he would take off his own clothes and they would have wild, passionate sex amongst all the crushed and steamy roses and the smell that they produced. So that was one of his techniques. Another technique he did, he gave all of his women nicknames. You always have a nickname for them. And finally, he was a very sad puppy living in his big mansion he built for his wife who had left him. And he took up with a lady by the name of Oh, I hate it when I blank out. Don't you just really hate that? Her name was, I hate that. I have to go back to my notes. I keep wanting to say Nita Naldi. It's Pola Negri.
Oh,
I got it mixed up,
yeah.
right? Pola Negri was the queen of UFA. UFA was a German film company. She was the toast of Europe. She was Polish, but made German movies after World War I. She came to the United States and was a very beautiful woman, did a great tango. They got together and had a relationship. We don't know how serious it was, but they certainly had something going on. We know that for a fact. And finally, of course, he was talked into making his last movie. He's only 30 years old. It was called The Son of the Sheik. Unfortunately, Hollywood by the Sea had changed. Now there were houses all over. You couldn't film anything there right then. They had roads and stuff, capitalizing. So they filmed the desert scenes in Yuma, Arizona. And in many ways, The Son of the Sheik is much, much better than the original Sheik. He plays the old Sheik and his son. And he even got Agnes Ayres to come out of retirement to play the son's mother, and of course, a whole cast of people. And eventually, it was popular. Many saw this as restoring his career. He went to New York City to help popularize the film. Now, here's the interesting thing. We don't know what happened. Now, there is the official story. He had an ulcer and it burst, and that's what killed him. Many of the doctors say, when he was first admitted to the hospital, that he had been poisoned. Lots of different stories about what happened on that last night. The official story is he was in his hotel room and he succumbed and was taken to the hospital. Others say they saw him the night before at all these speakeasies. Another person found his top hat with his name on it in the streets of New York. How it got there, we don't know. There's a lot of stories we don't know. And at this last big party, where everyone was drinking, guess what happened? After Valentino dies, all the people who were at the party take off for Europe and can't be found. Sounds very suspicious. But the nation went nuts. Everyone was praying for him. It was on the radio. It seemed he was a strong, athletic man. He started to get better. And then infection came in. They have no sulfa drugs, no penicillin, hadn't been invented yet. Had to be down the line a few years later. And it got to him, he got infection, and then finally succumbed to it. His last words were, "Don't close the blinds, I want to welcome the new day," which of course never happened. His funeral was a mob scene. 300,000 people went there. They had guards supposedly sent by Mussolini to guard the casket of the national hero Valentino. By the way, the studios paid the guys that were not in league with Mussolini or the fascist government at that time. And of course, they brought him to the United States, and the studios went nuts. Who could they get to replace Valentino? Well, they got a young actor, he was very handsome. His name was, I hate it when I blank out. Don't you just really hate that? There was a guy that groomed. He was a Jewish fellow, he had dark cast to his figure, and they renamed him Ricardo Cortez. They said he was a Latino. And they tried to make him the new Valentino. And there was also Raymond Navarro, I remember the name, who later went on to play in Ben-Hur, the other handsome fellow. They even took poor Valentino's brother and tried to give him surgery so he'd look like Valentino. After succumbing to like 12 surgeries, they said he couldn't act. That was the bad thing about Ricardo Cortez. He couldn't act either. He's a handsome man. Later on, guess what? He, in the talking era, was tapped to play Perry Mason in a series of films made by Warner Brothers. But guess what? His acting talents had not improved. So he only made one Perry Mason movie after that, Ricardo Cortez. There's a lot of different people want to try to supersede Valentino. But what did Paramount Studios do after the death of Valentino? They re-released The Sheik. They added musical score to it. They put in a few extra cuts. And what did they do? Capital. That's one of the things that's so good about Hollywood. It's simple. It runs on one thing only.
Yes.
Money. It's all about the bucks. And that's what they did. And he went on to make, they continued to use his name any way they could. Even when talking films got in, they put musical scores and sound effects in and re-released Valentino's movie to make even more money. Well, so at that point in time, Hollywood by the Sea pretty much dried up. But other films made in Ventura, including a strange film called The Bride of Palomar, made by Cosmopolitan Studios, which was owned by none other than William Randolph Hearst. And it's an anti-Asian film.
Oh.
Bride of Palomar is a racehorse movie shot at the fairgrounds of Ventura. And in the movie, these Japanese people are going to take over the state by importing people. And Akuda was played by Warner Olin, who later became known for his portrayal of Charlie Chan. But he was actually Swedish, he was not Chinese at all. Actually, the good thing about Warner Olin, he actually didn't try to learn Chinese and tried to be as Chinese as his supporting cast. So other people who played Chan were not like that, or blew off the Chinese actors or were not liked for it, but they liked Warner Olin. So he played the evil Akuda, and it's about all the money of the ranch is resting on this one horse race, and the horses are Bride of Palomar. Well, a few years later, they went back to the same place, and they shot a movie with the hero of football, Red Grange, the Galloping Ghost, the guy who created a little thing called the NFL. The idea of using sports heroes in movies, not new at all. So he made this movie. He told the studio, I'll make the movie, but just whatever you do, no football. Please, I don't want to do any more football. So they made a racing movie about race cars. It was called Racing Romeo. And it had starring in it Barney Oldfield. Any of you know who Barney Oldfield was? The first man to drive a mile a minute, 60 miles an hour. People said that if you got that fast, you would take your breath away and you'd suffocate. And he proved them wrong, of course. Barney Oldfield, an old man, but he was a brief part in the film. They shot it right in Ventura. And so those are the two silent films that were shot at Ventura. But they've continued to make movies here in Oxnard. They continue to make them in Ventura. Perhaps the most notable films in the city of Ventura is Homicidal. Have you ever seen it? Made in the 60s by a guy named Castle. A bad ripoff of Psycho. Oh. It was all filmed in downtown Ventura. Kind of interesting. They also filmed, more recently, Jack Nicholson filmed The Two Jakes, which is a sequel to Chinatown, in our city hall in Ventura. By the way, don't watch it. It's the world's worst movie. I mean, if there's a reason to bring back the Frenchman, the Polish-French director who is exiled to Paris, that movie is the reason. Don't let Jack direct anything more, and he hasn't wisely since then. So that's movie. And more recently, John Travolta was in a movie called Swordfish. 15 minutes of that movie, it's a caper film, was shot in downtown Ventura. A lot of films been done in Oxnard too, including 2 of the episodes of Back to the Future. The ending sequence with the train took place in Oxnard. Also, David Carradine, who made a lot of money in that TV show Kung Fu. He took all of his money and invested it in a series of bad movies. Now, the first one he did was called Death Race 2000.
And oddly enough, it wasn't a bad, it was probably the best of the lot he did. And what did he do to film it? It's a low budget. He rented the theater on Oxnard Boulevard, the Theatro, which was no longer being used. And I used that as a set for some of the movies. Much of the movie was shot right there in Oxnard, with the actual car race scene shot at a variety of other locations. That was shot here as well. And bits and pieces of lots of films, like It's a Mad World, has one scene in it, shot in Oxnard. A lot of it shot in Santa Monica, all over the place. Hollywood continues to come up and continues to make little short movies. And they will, as long as film runs through cameras, as long as there is a Hollywood. Unfortunately, due to labor costs and union dues, a lot of the movie companies aren't being filmed around here. They're going to Canada, where they don't have to abide by the union rules. They can use independent people rather than pay the high rates for camera, grips, and all the other things that they do down here. So Oxnard will have a continuous say in the movie industry, and my prediction, it'll come back. And someday, who knows, maybe more movies will be shot at Hollywood by the Sea. And the idea of seeing film crews running around is something that will once again grace this part of California. Now I'd like to turn it over for any questions you might have about my topic of Hollywood. I do want to bring to mind that my family has been involved in the movie business since 1928. 26. My dad worked for MGM. Matter of fact, any of you see Andy Hardy? The films? Andy Hardy's car in the movies was my dad's car. The studio bought it because it was such a heap, and he managed to buy a brand new Model A Ford with what the studio paid for it, and that was Andy Hardy's car in the film series. So a lot of involvement with movie. I still have cousins who are in the film industry. They work for Columbia, Universal, and of course MGM. So there's still a lot of Hollywood in my family background. And remarkable as it may seem, even I have been in a couple of movies. So that always made me a little proud. My dad was in a number of films as an extra and stuff like that. It's an interesting look at our California past, but it's very much part of our history, because moving pictures started in Palo Alto with Leland Stanford and his horse bet. And that's what really started, so it's part of our heritage. Here in California, in this part of the world, is the movie industry. It's literally in our blood. Okay, without further ado, I want to answer any questions you might have, but I must caution you, I had a really hideous ear infection in this ear a couple of years ago, and it completely destroyed the hearing in this ear, and it was one of the most painful things I ever experienced in my life. Wow. Even heart surgery wasn't as painful as that ear infection. And the pain's gone. That's the good news. Bad news, it took the hearing with me. So if I have a hard time hearing you, it's because of that. I'm not ignoring you. So any questions you might have?
I do have one.
Okay.
Did we not miss the latest, one of the latest rates, Sideways?
What was that again?
Sideways.
Did Sideways not go through Ventura?
No, that was San Barbara County.
What were we talking about? Sideways? I didn't miss that one. Sorry. It was filmed in Clark here. There's a lot of movies that had short bits, like The Babysitter was filmed partly in Ventura. A lot of other small films, A Man Fell to Earth, filmed at Arroyo Verde Park. A lot of other films. Yes, another one.
I just have a more general question. I see about Hollywood and its parties and all that, and films going on and all that, and I can't help but wonder if sometimes, all these guys that work out in Hollywood, they're working in bonds and things like that, I think they just wanted to get the heck out of there and get the heck out of Dodge and go up the coast and hang out.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'll speak up. You talked a lot about during the 20s, silent film area, and you know, they're all working in Hollywood, working out of barns and little, you know, kind of like industrial spaces, if you will. I can't help but think that they wanted to get out of there and come up the coast and just hang out on the beach, yeah?
And that's exactly right. It was cheaper to drive our car from Hollywood up to here than go out to the Mojave Desert. A lot cooler, too. So it just made shooting in Ventura County very, very agreeable and acceptable for low rates, you see. And a lot of movie stars actually live up here, live in Ojai, so it makes it even easier. They don't have to go far from home. And I have had the great pleasure of meeting a lot of movie people in my life, and it never really affects me. I just see them as people who have a job. Actually, a rather crummy job. The hours are horrible. And you're only as good as your last picture. When the picture's over with, you're out of work again. And so it's really not a great romantic life, but they do get paid a lot of money to do that kind of work. So, anyhow, another question? Hopefully I can hear you. Yes, a question.
Could you list the early films again?
What was that again?
Could you list the early films that were filmed here in Oxnard again?
Oh, the films that were listed here. Well, okay. Bound for Morocco is lost. Only 10% of the silent movies still exist. Fortunately, it's usually the cream of the crop. Not a lot of really great films were lost, but that one was lost, sadly enough. Now, The Sheik is still out there. You can see that. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. So is The Shriek of Araby. So I would advise, if you ever get a chance, watch both back to back. You'll notice the jokes that are there, which you might not get. But a lot of other films, like the Queen of Sheba, that too, unfortunately, is lost. A number of films are lost, but there's a lot of good ones made by Cecil B. DeMille. When he went to shoot his film, a great epic film, the Ten Commandments, he didn't film it in Oxnard. He went up to the beach at Guadalupe and built a whole Egyptian city out in the middle of nowhere and filmed it. That's the first movie that cost $5 million. He only had a budget of $1 million. Paramount, Lasky was going nuts. He said, "You overspent your budget. Come back, stop shooting." But you know what he'd do? He'd rip up the telegrams and keep shooting. They sent policemen to arrest him. He talked the policeman into becoming part of the movie. He had over 3,000 extras and over 1,000 animals, chariots, horses, this huge city, and he lived in a huge circus tent. And he had 3 people just making sandwiches for all the people, constantly, day and night. And finally, the studio was going nuts over it. So they went to his wife, and they said, it's a scandalous story here. They said, I don't know how true this is, so this is what I've been told. It may be wrong. They told his wife to get this papers, deliver it to him, to stop filming. He had wasted $3 million at this point in time. So she got on the train up to San Luis Obispo, and further up, went up to Santa Maria, hired a car in the middle of the night. They drove out to the set, this big Egyptian city. He's living in this tent, and she comes in, turns the light on in the tent, and there is her husband in bed with her best friend and his secretary. They're both naked. So this is a long pause. There's his wife. What does she do? She puts down her bag, takes off all of her clothes, and climbs into bed with him. And from then on, it was kind of like a threesome. But they continued on, seemingly got along real well. So she didn't lose her best friend, and she didn't lose her husband either. But I don't know many women who would be that tolerant. But he was a pretty strange fellow in his own right, Cecil B. DeMille. But if someone should have a statue put up to them in Hollywood, it should be Cecil B. DeMille. Because he was a guy who actually picked out that spot to make movies in.
He was the true founder of the movie industry in Southern California. Anyway, another question?
Just an answer that, yes.
Oh, one more? Okay.
Best living director, Sesame.
I thought it was interesting that you mentioned David Carradine.
What was that again, please?
David Carradine, you said?
David Carradine, yes, the actor.
Because I think I read that his father, was it John Carradine, lived in Oxnard?
Yes, he did. You're absolutely right. I had the good fortune to meet with him and actually was in a production with him at one point in time, just before he passed away. Wonderful man. He had a very active career, and some of his sons continue in film, even though David has now passed on. And so has John Carradine, with their old acting family, and they made the transition from the Broadway stage into, of course, movie making, which they inhabited a very prominent part and played some of the greater roles in both horror and drama. He was an interesting man. But no, David Carradine did that. Now, Death Race 2000, you can get that on YouTube too. It's really not a bad film, but unfortunately the film's kind of got worse and worse and worse until toward the end he both ran out of money and I guess ideas, who knows. But a lot of actors have gone on to become directors, and some have done very well. Charles Laughton, for instance, made some really good films. Anyway, getting away from our subject for tonight, as you can see, I really like movies and the history of early film and even more contemporaneous film. Okay, any other questions? Well, I want to thank you for coming and learning a little bit about Rudolph Valentino and about the Sheik. And I advise you, if you get a chance, go on to YouTube when you've got a few hours of time and watch it. But look for the ice plant on the sand dunes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.